One of the great issues of today is the overwhelming threat to biodiversity. With the growing demands of the human population, species in all parts of the world are being stressed due to climate change, habitat loss, and pollution. We are seeing unprecedented rates of extinction. The crisis in the natural environment requires us, as landowners and gardeners, to work with nature to provide a safe haven for native plants and their dependents while attending to our own needs. We can collectively help counter the negative effects of human activity, such as habitat loss, by simply tuning into nature. Tuning in means looking to the natural environment for guidance. Nature is our best teacher, always there, always showing how. In recognizing, understanding, and applying her principles and copying her designs, we ourselves achieve a sense of place within the natural order. The natural environment is a complex mix of living and non-living things, with life perfectly tuned in to the length of day, climate, and seasonal changes. Interrelationships and interdependencies have been fine-tuned over millions of years. Nature's gardens are not raked, groomed, and artificially fertilized. Natural litter is vital. It nourishes, protects, and is in constant state of change. It is a way to ensure resources aren't depleted. So what originates in a yard should stay in a yard. That's how one can work with nature to achieve sustainability. These principles were applied in this garden design, mimicking the deciduous forest floor. In the process of naturalizing a yard, we allow ancient interrelationships to reestablish. We extend a hand to the many indigenous creatures whose predecessors depended on the natural biodiversity of the forests, meadows, and wetlands. As we allow spaces to go back to their original communities, we will gradually see the diversity of life return. Before the arrival of Europeans, indigenous plants represented the only sources of medicines and materials for the indigenous people. Some of their traditional medicines are still used today, but much of their knowledge of medicinal plants has been lost, and many medicinal qualities have not been discovered yet. The natural environment is a source of food. Before the arrival of Europeans and the upheaval that followed, indigenous people found everything they needed to sustain them. Their intimate knowledge of and respect for the plants and animals in their environment came with the acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of all life. Maintaining biodiversity is absolutely vital, as every species that goes extinct represents a loss that will impact every one of us as a member of Earth's community. Rather than fret about what needs doing in our yards, we're all better off if we take a deep breath and look around at the wonders of the natural world, recognizing nature as teacher, nurturer, and healer. We need to let go. Rather than seeking to control nature, we best work with her. We would then begin to see the world through the eyes of a child, filled with wonder. We would see the beauty and complexity of nature, perfect in design, rhythms, and interrelationships. Everything we see or don't see is an integral part of the well-being of the whole. Our finite minds can't fully grasp the significance of everything around us. Cycles ensure perpetual existence for species on board this remarkable planet. A fungus we see is actually a small part of a huge underground network of fungal mycelia that connect many woodland plants to these effective decomposers and ensure them a constant supply of nitrogen and other important nutrients. Nothing in nature goes to waste, and there is naturally a home for everyone. A young sugar maple emerges from the humus left by its predecessors, and its relationship with these Christmas ferns will likely continue over the next 100-some years, with the maples providing shade for the ferns when it is their turn to dominate the forest canopy. An old stump is nursed to young plants. Inside is a bustling community of animals and fungi interacting in such a way that ensures a place for those that follow. There is constant rebuilding. Relationships between members of a natural community have been fine-tuned over millennia. They are perfect in every sense of the word. The natural environment is also aesthetically pleasing, with incredible designs, textures, and colors. A quiet woodland pond reflects the surrounding beauty. It is a source of water for woodland birds and mammals, as well as home to many aquatic species and those that need water for part of their life cycle. A stream coursing through the landscape acts like an artery, moving nutrients, water, and life from one place to another. Shoreline vegetation keeps the water cool and shelters the animals that live in these shallow waters. A close-up of the shoreline shows natural diversity of vegetation. Every square inch of the natural world is inhabited. Here an old fence supports Virginia creeper, while the wooden brace is home to the grenadier lichen. Growing native plants is a way of reaffirming the natural order. We imitate nature's gardens and so attract the wildlife dependent on specific plants. A natural yard is a paradise within easy reach, a completely self-sustaining community that offers us so little work for so much pleasure. Another thing we should keep in mind at the community, national, and international level is the issue of fragmentation of natural spaces that is seriously impacting wildlife populations in terms of breeding and migration. Corridors of native vegetation that extend through rural and urban areas ensure wildlife can continue to thrive in spite of human intrusion into their spaces. We as humans are meant to coexist with all the other creatures that inhabit our space. We can help by seeing the world through their eyes. Imagine mammals trying to cross a highway that cuts through their migration route, or a flock of birds in flight over rural and urban spaces. These are important considerations when planning out our spaces, either on a small or large scale. This can mean ensuring short corridors from feeding grounds to breeding grounds within our own yards. Every yard is potentially a small section of a wildlife corridor, providing shelter, food, and a source of water. Every type of yard can become a different type of wildlife habitat, featuring a diversity of plant life. Here are some examples. Shaded areas can feature woodland wildflowers that bloom in April and May before the trees leaf out. These provide early spring sources of nectar for insects and hummingbirds. The foliage of some of these plants persists through the seasons, adding interesting form and texture to the forest floor, while providing cover to the small creatures. As the forest shade deepens, other species like white snakeroot, woodland goldenrods, and asters provide a late source of nectar to woodland insects. Shaded moist areas can feature species like lobelias, gentian, jack-in-the-pulpit, jewelweed, and turtlehead. Trying to grow these in areas that become parched in the summer is a hopeless venture. Low shaded moist areas are ideal sites. If one is fortunate enough to have an open, wet area, it's a great opportunity to rehabilitate one of these fast disappearing communities by reintroducing the native plants that belong there. Once abundant in Ontario, most wetlands have become landfills or fallen victim to development, in spite of the fact that they are areas crucial to the breeding of amphibians and many insects like dragonflies. Drought tolerance is a plant adaptation that enables us to have beautiful yards through droughts without watering. Those on wells and in municipalities with water use restrictions would do well to grow many of these plants whose root systems, once established, and special foliage helps them to survive under difficult conditions, providing oases of nourishment for wildlife. Here are some things to keep in mind to help our yards be low maintenance and self-sustaining as nature meant them to be, with the potential to sustain us as well. The ability of plants to convert light energy into chemical energy drives global ecosystems. The vast amount of biomass created this way easily sustains all consumers on Earth. It is responsible for removing consumer waste in the form of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and returning life-sustaining food and oxygen. The Earth has limited resources, always has. It has been compared to a spaceship orbiting the sun. The sun provides the energy to drive the cycles that ensure a constant supply of molecules necessary for life. Ecosystems are naturally equipped to recycle all materials that pass constantly from being part of a living organism to being part of the environment and back again. We essentially live in a closed system with little more than sunlight entering. We would be wise to live within natural cycles rather than trying to take materials out of circulation. What originates in a yard should stay in a yard. Mulch helps prevent erosion by absorbing rainwater, slows down evaporation, and insulates the soil from winter cold and summer heat. It eventually breaks down into the rich humus in topsoil. In a larger food garden where mulch is limited, one can use a paper weed barrier that acts like mulch through which one can plant various vegetables, fruits, or herbs, then mulch the pathways to prevent the germination of annual weeds and ensure the soil is well protected from extreme temperatures and moisture loss. The water cycle ensures a constant supply of clean water. Dew supplies water on an almost daily basis. Rocks become sites of condensation during hot, humid days, with trickles of water becoming available to plants whose roots extend under them. Mulch in this woodland community soaks in rainwater and slows down evaporation. Even the gentlest rain that falls on a roof allows for collection opportunities that will help sustain our yard through the hotter, drier days of summer. In a sustainable yard, we rely on the water available to us naturally rather than watering heavily from groundwater or treated municipal sources. Soil comes from rocks eroded into sand and clay. The precious humus of topsoil comes from decomposition. Under natural processes, it took thousands of years to form soil that sustains our gardens. When we lay bare part of our garden without planting or mulching, nature sends in the weeds to prevent erosion of precious topsoil or scorching from the hot summer sun. Annual weeds are the first plants you expect to see after a major upheaval. Most require light to germinate. Then they die out when the perennials move in. So when we pull a weed, it's wise to replace it with mulch or a plant that would naturally succeed it. Better yet, avoid turning over the soil. To turn a bit of lawn into a garden, cover the area with cardboard and then a layer of compost and mulch. This will replace existing vegetation with additional topsoil without interfering with the soil ecosystem. Every species has its controls. The predator's role in a natural community is to prevent runaway populations of another resident. Natural predation never eliminates a prey species. It helps to keep its population healthy. Spiders, dragonflies, ladybugs, shrews, toads, snakes, hawks, foxes, and other predators have their place and their own controls. Predators help ensure good harvests from our food gardens. There is growing concern with the plight of pollinators. Habitat loss and use of pesticides are the causes of many of these important species being threatened with extinction. Without pollinators, we would have little to eat. Every food garden should have a diversity of wildflowers planted nearby to provide nectar and pollen from early spring to fall. This would help ensure a bountiful harvest of fruits like cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, apples, legumes, strawberries, and raspberries. Pollinators include hundreds of species of wild bees, butterflies, flies, and beetles. Here, the leafcutter bees will cut small pieces out of leaves to create larval chambers into which they place pollen foraged from flowers, then lay an egg into each chamber. Hoverflies are not only one of the most important group of pollinators when they're adults, but their larvae feed on aphids in our gardens. Many bees live in colonies, others are solitary. All are effective pollinators. Wasps typically feed on nectar as adults, then hunt other insects or spiders as food for their young. These moths are active during the day, but most ensure pollination continues after sunset. Another group of pollinators, the butterflies, are so appealing as a group that many gardeners intentionally plant for them. A butterfly gardener includes not only the nectar-producing wildflowers, but also larval host plants to ensure the food supply is complete throughout a butterfly's life cycle. This giant swallowtail fed on foliage of citrus when it was young. Here in Ontario, we need to have prickly ash or hop tree in the vicinity to provide food for giant swallowtail caterpillars. The crescent butterfly caterpillar is dependent on asters. The tiger swallowtail caterpillars depend on the foliage of trees like cherries, ash, and poplars. Red admiral larvae feed on nettles. Great spangled fritillary larvae feed on violets. The American lady butterfly larvae feed on pussy toes and pearly everlasting. The Baltimore butterfly caterpillar feeds on turtlehead. The silver spotted skipper larvae feed on the foliage of legumes. And the monarch butterfly caterpillar feeds exclusively on milkweeds. Native and heirloom species of flowers are more valuable to wildlife than cultivars that are all pretty petals, but have little or no accessible nectar or pollen. Most plants are benefited by close association with other plant species. Companion planting enables plants to support each other by sharing nutrients and/or space. Here, legumes provide nitrogen to the corn, and the corn provides a place for pole beans to climb. Other companions lure away pest insects from the vegetables attract predators of pests, or just simply discourage destructive insects by emitting strong aromas close to the host plant. Herbs are often very effective in this way. The wildlife that inhabits natural areas, whether plant or animal, is specially adapted and is able to thrive without competition from other species. However, as natural barriers become less effective with human travel and trade between continents, plants and animals alien to local natural communities can take over ecological niches of other species. The more we can prevent the intrusion of invasive non-native species into our yards, the more likely we can help maintain the ecological diversity of our local area. Any refuge we can provide to more vulnerable native species becomes an investment for the future. Plants native to the area are an integral part of the original sustainable systems that existed in this part of the world before the major upheaval brought about by human activity. Planting them is the first step to allowing natural communities to reestablish. Biodiversity is essential to the health of a natural community, and every species, whether gorgeous or not, has its special place. Our commitment to protecting biodiversity helps ensure a healthy planet for future generations. There are hundreds of species of native trees, shrubs, vines, grasses, ferns, sedges, and wildflowers available to help us turn our yards into wildlife sanctuaries. These can be acquired as seeds, bare root, or potted stock. A little research ahead of time is helpful in planning out a mini woodland, thicket, or wildflower garden. Every native plant we establish in our yard will attract its special dependents, and these in turn will attract other species. Rather than judge any of these visitors as good or bad, we best rely on nature to establish balance. Our existence on Earth is similar to that of creatures living in a closed terrarium with little more than sunlight entering. Whatever happens in our small corner of this Earth does impact the whole. Our challenge is to abandon many of the ways gardening has been done in the past and tune in to natural processes. We need to acknowledge our close connection with all that is, and so live in harmony with the systems, processes, and other life forms that have allowed us to thrive as a species. Rather than read another book on gardening, it is time for us to look directly to nature for guidance. A natural garden encourages us to become observers. We take our cues from nature in planning the garden, plant the species suited for the area, and then we let it go. Gardening naturally allows us to relax. We are encouraged to reconnect with our roots. Gardening naturally is a way of making peace with nature.